Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be actually talking about Halloween 5, and more specifically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating the perfect script for Halloween 5. You guys like the last video I did so much on Halloween Ends where I recreated the perfect script, and I wanted to take this up to 11 because I wanted to tackle the challenge of recreating the script for Halloween 5. The reason why I picked Halloween 5 is because it's one of the most infamous movies in the franchise, because Halloween 4 ended so strongly with Jamie killing her stepmom, and she was standing at the top of the stairs. Loomis was in fear about what she's going to become. Just all the various things, right? There was a ton of mystery around it. It was one of the better endings in the series. So we expected the storyline to pick up in 5, maybe lead somewhere else we haven't gone before. And you know what we got, right? We got one of the worst movies in the franchise because they ended up making her a mute. They ended up killing off the Rachel character way too early. The mask was terrible. The whole story itself was terrible. They replaced the Michael Myers house with a terrible house that didn't look anything like the original ones, as well as the Cult of Thorn stuff, you know, with the guy in the black suit. It was just a mess, right? We all know how bad Halloween 5 is. So, like I said, I took it upon myself, and I took a little while to make this, and I feel like I came up with the perfect, most amazing Halloween 5 script, and I want to share that with you guys. So the way this is going to work is I'm just going to basically read the script. It's going to be kind of like a monologue type thing. It's not going to be more or less anything really on screen because I don't have much supporting footage for this because this movie doesn't exist. But there is going to be some B-roll over the top of this, but mainly I'm just going to be reading this. So feel free to just set the phone to the side, keep your headphones in, and just listen to what I have to say and listen to the story and use your imagination. But with that being said, I want to get right into this because I'm super excited to read this because I put a lot of time in this and it was a lot of fun to make. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. And yeah, let's get started with this. Our story starts off with police lights, and Loomis is going to be standing there at the ambulance comforting Rachel and her dad. And the stepmom is being carted away. We can see that happening as well, and they get pretty emotional as they're seeing her being carted away. And you can also see Jamie in the back of the police car, still wearing the bloody clown costume from the previous movie. Loomis leaves the family to approach the car where Jamie is sitting, and as he's approaching the car, he overhears two cops talking about how they haven't found the Meyers body still, so it's unclear as to whether he's dead or not. He tries to talk to Jamie, but she won't look at him. She's just staring forward, expressionless, just emotionless. The car drives off, and Loomis just stares hopelessly as it turns the corner. And then the opening credits start with the Halloween theme, the pumpkin, as well as some highlights in the background of what happened in the previous movie. We fast forward 1 year later, and we see Loomis pulling into the sanitarium parking lot on October 30th. He checks in and walks the halls until he reaches Jamie's room. Loomis walks in and begins, like he has done multiple times a week for the past year, to try and talk to Jamie, but she just sits there and stares out the window as she's been doing for the past year. At the end of their session, in frustration, Loomis mentions something about her being just like it, referring to Michael Myers. After he makes this statement, something weird happens that hasn't happened since that night when she killed her stepmom. She turns and looks at Loomis and says, "I am nothing like him. You will see soon enough because he's coming back for me." Loomis recoils in fear because this is the first time he's heard her speak in over a year, and then this statement is so shocking to him because she's referring to Michael. And then Jamie turns back to the window and Loomis leaves the room. Loomis drives over to the sheriff's office and explains to him what Jamie said and insists that he needs to be ready. The sheriff then counters, saying that yes, they haven't found a body, but nobody could survive that firing barrage as well as fall into the flooded mine shaft. Still, he insists that he was wrong before, so he takes extra precaution and states that he's going to increase the patrols over the next couple of nights. Loomis thanks the sheriff and then departs. Soon after, he calls Rachel and tells her what Jamie said as well. We cut over to Rachel, and she is talking to Loomis, and it's clear that the past year has not been good to her or her dad. With clear concern in her voice, she thanks Loomis for the heads up and then hangs up the phone. We cut to later that night, and the nurse comes in to check on Jamie as she always does, and Jamie is still facing towards the window, and the nurse states that she's going to be back in a few minutes to help Jamie get into bed. We slowly zoom in on Jamie, and we eventually pan around towards her face. At first, we just see the same expressionless look as she stares into the night. Suddenly, a smile starts to creep onto her face. After a few seconds, we cut to the outside of the sanitarium, and we're still looking at the window, and we can see Jamie staring out, facing towards the window. And then a figure actually walks into frame, and we could just see a shadow kind of come in, but we know there's somebody there, and the classic Michael Myers breathing starts. We hold for a few seconds for effect, and then we cut immediately to October 31st, Halloween. During this cut, we see Rachel pull up to the sanitarium. She actually has not visited Jamie yet because the trauma from that night is still so great. Rachel checks in and approaches Jamie's room. Jamie is sitting there facing toward the window as she always is doing, and there's a long silence, but Jamie actually breaks the silence and says, so you finally came. Rachel recoils at the hollowness and lack of expression in her voice, and with a shaky voice, Rachel says, I couldn't bear to see you like this. I didn't know what to say or what to expect. I was just scared. There's a pause, and then Jamie says, why are you scared of me? Rachel, with a puzzled look, says, what do you mean? You know what you did, so why wouldn't I be scared? Jamie responds with a little bit of a chuckle and says, you think that was something, huh? I'm not the one you should be scared of. You need to fear the boogeyman. You have no clue what he's going to do to you and this whole town. Rachel begins to get emotional, but also a sense of anger and frustration creeps in, and then she says, Michael's dead, Jamie. The police shot him and he fell into a mine shaft. He isn't coming back. Jamie, with a smirk, finally turns to Rachel. She stares her into her eyes and says, you can't kill the boogeyman. You will see soon enough. Rachel's just mesmerized by the blank, expressionless look that Jamie has in her eyes, and she quickly leaves the room. Rachel is crying outside the room, and then we cut to Haddonfield on Halloween night. We see that there's trick-or-treaters everywhere, but there's also a lot of patrol cars going around and just sitting on corners and things. There's obviously a high level of anxiety with the parents as they take their kids house to house trick-or-treating because of all the patrol cars. We cut to one of the cop cars and they're talking about if they actually really believe if Meyers is still alive or if this is just a complete waste of time, and we stay with them for a bit and we get some more shots of the parents trick-or-treating with their kids and whatnot. We then cut to Loomis as he's walking through the streets of Haddonfield and we end up at the Meyers house. He walks in the house and begins to look around. He ends up in the room where the first murder happened and he looks out the window and stares into the streets. Again, we see people out there trick-or-treating and whatnot. And then he says out loud, are you really out there? What do you want with Jamie? What does she have to do with all of this? Do you want to kill her? Do you want to corrupt her? Do you want her to really kill your sister's daughter? Michael, are you out there? We then cut back to the sanitarium and the nurse comes in like she always does and says she's going to help Jamie into bed soon. Jamie is sitting there for a while, but then she hears a noise in the hallway. She turns to face the door and notices the door is wide open. Jamie wanders into the hall and it's completely empty. Hesitant, she walks down the hall and is way too quiet and she's confused as to why she doesn't see anyone. After wandering the halls of the sanitarium for a bit, she ends up seeing a trail of blood leading into one of the rooms. She opens the door and turns the lights on and finds the nurse that's been taking care of her for the past year dead on the floor. She leaves the room and goes around the next corner and starts seeing doctors and patients and nurses all dead throughout the hallways and in the various rooms. When she rounds another corner, she ends up seeing a hooded figure at the end of the hallway holding a bloody knife facing right towards her. They stare at each other for a few seconds and then Jamie says with a shaky voice, Uncle, is that you? He doesn't respond but begins to approach her slowly. Jamie doesn't run or move. She just stands there, motionless. The hooded figure gets within feet of her and stares down at her and she looks up at him. We zoom in on Jamie's face again and there's a pause between them and again the smirk begins to creep up on her face and she says, is it time? We cut back to Rachel's house where she's handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. She's still visibly shaken and upset from her visit earlier, but she still needs to take care of her dad, so she goes up to check on him, and then he's still not doing well, but she does everything she can for him. The doorbell rings and Rachel goes to check and see who it is. She opens the door and it's Loomis. He's there to check up on her and see how she's doing. He comes in and they sit down and they begin to talk about her visit to the sanitarium today. She says, I went to see Jamie today. She doesn't seem human anymore. What has happened to her? What's happened to my sister? Loomis, with clear concern in his eyes, explains, this is how she's been for the past year, expressionless, staring out that window. I want to get through to her, but I fear that she's just as gone as it. Rachel, with a clear puzzled look, says, it? What do you mean by that? Loomis elaborates, saying, it being Michael. Most people think he's a man, but it isn't. Not anymore. It has the same expressionless look that Jamie has, the blackest eyes. When I mentioned it yesterday to Jamie, that's when she spoke for the first time in over a year. Rachel details her encounter with Jamie to Loomis. Loomis just sits there until she's done and then responds, I don't know how, but I feel like they're connected in some way. I don't understand why, but I just have that feeling. The way she talks about it, the boogeyman, makes me feel like there's some deeper mystery at play here, and I tend to get to the bottom of it and figure it out. Rachel then thanks Loomis for his visit and then he departs, and as Loomis leaves, we establish that there's a cop car outside of Rachel's house. We cut over to the same cops that we established earlier that were having the conversation about whether Michael is actually back or not, and then they end up hearing something break nearby. They both go out to investigate the disturbance. They split up and we follow one of the officers from behind. As he's walking between the houses and he's checking his corners, he ends up getting to the end of one of the houses and a tall figure grabs him, pulls him around the corner, and we can clearly hear stabbing sounds in the background. We cut to the next officer who's a few houses down and he's getting toward the back of another house. It's pitch black dark and he approaches the backyard and then suddenly a motion floodlight comes on and he sees a little girl standing in the middle of this backyard with her back toward him. He calls out, "Little girl, are you okay? Where are your parents?" He approaches slowly, continuing to try and get the girl to respond. He pans around her and looks down and he notices that she's wearing a withered clown mask stained with blood. Puzzled, he shakily says, "I'm here to help. Are you okay, little girl?" She looks up at him and says, "Yes, I'm okay." And there's a pause and then she says, "But you're not." Then she stabs him in the stomach. Shocked, he steps backwards, and then that's when hooded Michael Myers grabs the officer and stabs him right through the throat. He drops to the ground, and we get a POV shot of the officer's perspective looking up at Jamie and Michael, and they both do the classic head tilt that Michael usually does, and then he bleeds out. We cut over to Rachel, and all the trick-or-treaters are done for the night, and she's sitting there reading a book. She then hears a loud thud from upstairs, and she calls out, "Dad, are you okay?" No answer. She slowly goes up the stairs and approaches her dad's room. She creaks the door open and then she sees him sleeping in bed. Just to double check, she goes to make sure he's okay and he's doing fine. And then she ends up looking out the window and notices a tall figure standing in the backyard. She stares at the figure for a few minutes and then the figure begins to move toward the house. Terrified, she runs down the stairs and out the door toward the cop car that's parked in front of her house. When she gets to the car, she sees that both officers are mangled and dead. She screams and runs back into the house to call the police. When she gets back into the house is now completely dark because the power's been cut. She double checks the phones and she gets nothing. Terrified, she walks up the stairs to wake up her father and try to get the heck out of there. When she gets back to the room, the door is now open. She walks in and her dad is now gone from the bed. She starts calling out, "Dad, Dad, where are you?" She wanders the upstairs and hits a couple of rooms and can't find him, and she finally opens the door at the end of the hall, which is the bathroom, and the entire bathroom is covered with blood and she sees her dad dead in the tub. She screams and turns around to run downstairs out of the house, but when she turns around, she sees a smaller figure standing at the top of the stairs. Rachel then turns to the closest room next to her. She closes and locks the door and starts to back away towards the window in the corner. She begins to try and open the window, and the camera, while she's doing it, slowly pans back to the door and it starts zooming towards the door, and we can hear a voice come through the other side. And the voice says, "What's the matter, sis? I told you the boogeyman was coming for you." Rachel then screams out, "Jamie, why are you doing this?" Suddenly the closet door opens and then Michael is standing there. At the same moment, Rachel finally gets the window open and then climbs out onto the roof and then scales down the side of the house and starts running down the street screaming. One of the patrol cars sees her and then stops, and then one of the officers asks, "What's going on, miss? Are you okay?" In hysterics, she says, "They killed my dad! They killed my dad!" Visibly confused and concerned, the officers let her in the car and then they call for backup. Rachel's house is then swarmed with officers, and the ambulance then carts the dad away, which of course is very emotional for her. And then Loomis finally arrives and sees Rachel sitting at one of the ambulances. He then asks her in a very low voice, "Was it Michael?" Which she responds, "It was both of them." Loomis, horrified, turns to one of the closest officers and says, "You need to send units to the sanitarium immediately." The officer then, puzzled, turns and looks at the sheriff, and the sheriff gives him the go-ahead to do so. Loomis then turns to Rachel again and reassures her that everything is going to be alright and that he's going to handle this and she needs to just stay with the officers. Loomis then gets up and starts walking with the sheriff and gets him up to speed with what Rachel told him. The sheriff then looks at Loomis and says, "Do you have any idea where they're going to go next?" Loomis then looks over at the sheriff and says, "I know exactly where they're going to go next." We cut back over to the Meyers house again, and then Loomis and the sheriff pull up in a squad car. As they're pulling up, the sheriff gets a call over the radio from some of the other officers that actually made it to the sanitarium, and they confirm the massacre at the sanitarium. Horrified, he looks over to Loomis, and they both are visibly disturbed. They both begin to approach the house, and they're getting ready to search it with guns drawn. As they're searching the house, Loomis goes upstairs to the room where the first kill happened, and when he gets in there, he sees Jamie in the room looking towards him with the clown mask on. She then pulls up the clown mask, and Jamie says, "I knew you would find me here. This is where it all started. This is where he was born." Loomis then questions her and says, "What now, Jamie? What's the goal here? Are you now gonna go on a killing rampage with Michael through the streets of Haddonfield? Is he the one telling you to do this?" Jamie pauses and then says, "I already told you, he was coming back for me. We're gonna finish what he started. Everyone in Haddonfield must die, starting with you and my sister Rachel." Loomis, with great sadness in his eyes, looks at Jamie and says, "You really are like it. You are the same." Michael then approaches the room and finally removes his hood, revealing a mangled, decrepit, and shredded mask. Loomis is taken aback by this, but then he looks at Michael and says, "Damn you, Michael! Look at what you did to this little girl. Why? Why her?" Then Michael begins to slowly approach Loomis. Loomis raises his gun, but before he can shoot, Michael grabs him and begins to choke him. Just then, the sheriff comes around the corner and starts shooting Michael in the back. Michael drops Loomis and then turns around to pursue the sheriff. The sheriff runs from the room and starts making his way downstairs as Michael pursues him. Loomis is bent over catching his breath, and then Jamie stabs him in the back of the leg. He jumps back in pain, and then Jamie knocks him down and begins to try and stab him again. Loomis fights her off. He hobbles toward the entrance of the room, down the stairs, and outside of the house. As he's walking down the stairs to the outside of the house, he falls over and then looks behind him and sees Jamie coming towards him from the inside of the house. He raises his gun to shoot her. She stops and stares at him. She tilts her head, and Loomis stares into her eyes. The gun starts to shake in his hands, and then he lowers it because he just can't shoot her. That same smirk comes across her face, and then she begins to walk toward Loomis while lowering her mask. She gets closer and starts to raise her knife, but before she can actually land the final blow on Loomis, suddenly a swarm of cops appear in front of the Meyers house. Loomis looks back at the cop cars and then back at Jamie, and she's gone. The sheriff comes running around the side of the house, and then he sees Loomis on the ground bleeding, and he asks him if he's okay, and then he states that he called for backup. Loomis asks the sheriff where Michael is, and the sheriff says he doesn't know because 1 second he was running for Michael and Michael was in pursuit of him, and then the next minute he was gone. The officers begin to sweep the area looking for the two, but ultimately they can't find them. Loomis is taken to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, and then Rachel comes to visit to check on Loomis. He tells her in a defeated voice, "I failed. I couldn't kill her. I failed." Rachel then comforts Loomis by saying, "I understand. If I was given the same opportunity, I wouldn't be able to kill her either." We cut to the POV looking into Loomis's room, and we can see both him and Rachel there together, and then two figures start to creep into the image, and we can see them staring into the window, and then again, the classic breathing starts to happen, and then we cue the credits. All right, so there's my revamped Halloween 5 script. Like, I know this is an out there idea. There's so many things out there that need to be tweaked for a movie perspective, but the general idea is good in my opinion. We needed to actually see Jamie do something more than just be a mute and connected to Michael like she was in the original script, right? I think it's cool to have like maybe like a Bonnie and Clyde type thing, but not really, where Michael's kind of like the more stoic killer. He's very quiet, you know, the sneaky kind, right? But then Jamie's a little bit more charismatic. She could be a little bit of a different killer. They're still connected and they work together, but Jamie's the more charismatic one. She's the one that's going to do the talking. Because like I said in my beginning part, it was just a mistake when they made her a mute, right? It was just silly and it didn't make sense. So anyways, this was a long video and this is a long script, but I'm definitely curious as to what you guys think. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is dumb? What would you do to make it better? Let me know down in the comments below. But all right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.